You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Welcome to Unbiased Science,
where we bring scientific method to the madness.
We're your hosts, Dr. Jess Steyer
and Dr. Sarah Scheinman.
And today we are tackling a topic that Sarah can't believe we're talking about. But if you've opened up social media lately, you've seen that raw milk is a very hot topic right now. And we're joined by two very special guests who have a different and unique perspective on this topic. So we're really excited to welcome them to talk about the topic of raw milk, safety concerns, pasteurization, all the things. So let me introduce our guests. Today, we're joined by the creators of the Millennial Ag podcast, where they bring fresh perspectives to agricultural conversations and tackle tough topics that often get overlooked in the industry. So first, let me introduce Catherine Lotspeech, the founder of Millennial Ag. Catherine's roots in agriculture run deep. She's the daughter of dairy farmers and the wife of a high school ag teacher. I love that. Known for being what she calls a boat rocker, Catherine has been advocating for positive change in agriculture since her middle school days, where she successfully campaigned to improve her school district's milk storage and delivery system. Her work through Millennial Ag reflects her belief that agriculturists have a responsibility to embrace innovation while questioning the status quo. Catherine, I'm already obsessed with you.
We love a boat rocker here at Unbiased Science. We love a boat rocker.
We love a boat rocker. Alongside her is Valine Cawhorn. Am I saying that correctly?
You are. You nailed it.
Yes. She's a fifth generation beef rancher from southern Idaho. Val brings both practical farming experience and technical expertise to our conversation. She's a Colorado State graduate in civil engineering with a concentration in soil and water and additional emphasis in animal science. She's currently working as a licensed professional engineer at Agro Professionals. She specializes in you're going to have to explain to me what this is. Is it CAFO compliance?
Yep, confined animal feeding operations.
Okay. And agricultural engineering design for feedlots and dairy operations. When she's not designing agricultural facilities, you might find her helping her husband on the farm and ranch, running or skiing or riding horses. So these two passionate agriculturists combine their diverse backgrounds to widen important conversations in the agricultural community through their weekly podcast. Catherine and Val, thanks so much for joining us.
Welcome, you guys.
Thank you so much for hosting us. We're excited to be here.
Absolutely. So before we hit record, Catherine made very clear she has a lot of strong opinions on this topic. So I'm really excited to turn things over to both her and Val shortly. But I wanted to share a little bit about the history of dairy and milk and pasteurization, and then Sarah's going to give us another little tidbit. But I was reading this incredible article in Smithsonian Mag, which we'll link in our show notes. But if you'll just give me a few minutes to give a little bit of a history lesson. So there was a shocking expose in 1858, which revealed a dangerous milk scandal. Distilleries in New York and Brooklyn were feeding their dairy cows the waste from grain distillation. The cows, kept in filthy conditions, produced bluish, toxic milk. To hide this, distributors added chalk, eggs, flour, and other substances, and then marketed it. I know. It's pretty awful. They marketed it.
Chalk?
Yeah, chalk to whiten it. I know. They marketed it as pure country milk. So here's how Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper condemned it. For the midnight assassin, we have the rope and the gallows. For the robber, the penitentiary. But for those who murder our children by the thousands, we have neither reprobation nor punishment. And he was talking about the fact that thousands of people died from what has been coined swill milk, this terribly dangerous milk. Milk hasn't always been the dietary staple we know it today. And I was interested to read that ancient civilizations actually transformed most milk into yogurt, butter, and cheese. And this is because it would quickly spoil in hot climates. But then cultural attitudes really vary dramatically. So the Greeks mocked, quote unquote, barbarians for drinking milk directly. Romans saw it as low status farmers' food, again in quotations, and Japanese Buddhists later dubbed Europeans butter stinkers. All right. I know. I kind of love that. Okay. So then, and we're going to talk all about pasteurization, but the pasteurization debate really divided America in the early 1900s. So despite a whole lot of evidence that raw milk was causing childhood deaths, many resisted the new technology. Chicago alderman Jacob Hay exemplified this resistance, calling pasteurization, quote unquote, false science and claiming it caused rickets and scurvy. The debate grew so intense that President Theodore Roosevelt's administration stepped in, and his Surgeon General wrote in a landmark 1908 report, while pasteurization is not the ideal to be sought, practically, it is forced upon us by present conditions. It prevents much sickness and saves many lives. The last thing I'll say, I'm sorry, I know I'm rambling, but this is so cool. So there was this book called Milk, a 10,000-year food fracas. I don't know if I'm saying this correctly. Yeah. By Mark Kurlansky. And it explains why milk remains controversial even today. So this is a quote: milk, probably more than any other food, is really personal. We're all set up as mammals to have milk as our first nutrition, and people are just kind of stuck on that idea. All right. Real quick, we get a lot of messages from people who feel very strongly, in particular, a lot of people who are concerned about animal welfare. I just want to acknowledge this perspective that we as humans shouldn't be drinking cow milk at all. So I don't think we're going to get into that conversation today. I just wanted to acknowledge that that is something that we've heard, but practically speaking, a lot of people do consume cow milk. And so we want to make sure that those who do are having safe, pasteurized, spoiler alert, cow milk.
Spoiler alert, pasteurization helps milk not spoil.
Oh my God. Wait, Catherine, before we get into this, I'm just so curious, like, how is it or why is it that you feel so strongly about this?
Oh man, you're loading the pipe here, Jess. I grew up, I am third generation on my family's dairy farm. We started in Connecticut and we moved to Utah to expand our operations when I was 3 years old. So my parents, it'll be 30 years this year that we've been milking cows in Utah. And, just as a full disclosure here, we did grow up drinking milk straight out of the bulk tank. It was delicious. The fat content was higher. It was nice and cold. And that's, it was a economic and expedient way to get protein and good nutrition into my family's diets. The part where it comes in for pasteurization for me and where my kind of cognitive dissonance comes in for this is that dairy farmers, family farmers know how to treat sanitization protocols to be able to make sure that your raw milk won't make you sick. And sometimes things still happen, right? It's an excellent growth medium and bacteria absolutely love milk for obvious reasons. It's delicious, right? So we grew up drinking raw milk, knowing how to sanitize our jugs. And, we follow the same exact protocols that we use to harvest milk in our dairy facility. So I grew up that way, but as I left home, as I, went to school, got out into the industry and out into the world, this happened while I was growing up too, but, people drink raw milk, they eat raw milk cheese, and people who are doing that maybe don't come from an agricultural background or a food safety background and don't use the processes and, the protocols that they need to make sure that raw milk doesn't sicken someone. And so this is a story I love to tell when it comes to raw milk, but there was a guy making cheese in northern Utah, sometime when I was a teenager, so 20 years ago. and he called himself the cheese man, and he was selling raw milk cheese out of the trunk of his car. Oh. Number one. Do you want to know where he was making his cheese?
The trunk of his car?
A bathtub in his house.
No.
Okay. And I don't care what you do to a bathtub as far as sanitization protocols. You're not getting that thing clean enough to make cheese in, okay?
Dead.
Was he bathing in the same bathtub?
I mean, you can only assume. Like, we don't even want to go down that route, right?
Immediately no.
So he was making cheese in his bathtub, and then he was selling it in the trunk of his car. So this is raw milk, and I'm only going to assume that the trunk of his car was not properly cooled, right? I think we can make that assumption. Mm-hmm. And so 16 people got sick with Campylobacter and Salmonella. And, there were no repercussions for him. He's really, really lucky that no one died. And there's stories like that rampant across the United States. And that's where it comes in for me, is that as a dairy farmer, as the daughter of dairyman, dairy woman, it's the harm that those kind of stories cause to the industry for the majority of us who take such care to take the very best care of our animals and the product that we are sending to our customers is what really, really gets me. Because if you're killing off customers, what is the point of being in business? You want them to return, right? Like, you need those customers. And we want to make sure that we are providing what we call nature's most nearly perfect food.
Wow.
God. So beware the cheese man is the moral of this story.
I'm going to run away.
Of the cheese man. Just, no, that's a hard no.
I know.
Okay, Val, I'm curious what got you interested in this topic. And then also, I mean, I just spoke at an agriculture event. It was the Florida Fertilizer and Agriculture Association with their winter meeting. And it was so interesting. I broke the ice by saying, so, what's a South Brooklyn city girl doing up here standing in front of a room full of farmers? And, they chuckled, and I had some really interesting conversations. And the folks in the room, I mean, these are farmers, and they take their work super seriously. They call themselves stewards of the land. And we weren't so much talking about raw milk. We were talking more about things like pesticides, GMO technology. But on the topic of pesticides, they kept saying, you also have to take into account some practical considerations, and the margins are already razor thin, and pesticides cost money. And so they're only applying what they need to apply, right, to meet safety standards and all that good stuff. Why did I bring this up? My point being, I'm a city girl. So I was saying, I'm approaching this from a scientific perspective, but my hands aren't in the dirt. I don't have that hands-on experience. So Val, I mean, it sounds like you've grown up around cows and in this world. And so I've heard people say, like, if you've been in the company of a cow, you know that you want to heat up and pasteurize what's coming out of them for safety. So can you just talk a little bit about that and your perspective?
Yeah, and I've always drank pasteurized milk just because that's what we bought from the grocery store, because we did not have a milk cow. We had beef cows. And if we milked the cows, things weren't going necessarily right in our industry. And so we tried really hard not to milk our beef cows. But it's a whole safety thing for me too. And I think, we've got to give people the right to choose what they want. If they want to make friends with the knives and go pull out of the bulk tank because they trust them, I don't want to get in the way. But for our mass population and for the majority of Americans, the amount of disease that can come from raw milk, and I would say any raw product in general, is high. And that's why we have our standards, and we've got to protect our products. We've got to protect the people. And I would say something just recently that came up that made me even more convinced or stood behind my pasteurization is the avian influenza. It's showing up in the milk before it's showing up in symptoms of the cow. And so we pasteurize it, we kill it. And the more research you do on pasteurization, it's not taking out nutrients. It's not taking out the added, and anytime you process, you're pulling the cream and the butter, and Catherine can go through all that, you are changing, the consistency of the milk that you might have pulled out of the bulk tank. Like, you're pulling creams and you're getting butter and you're maximizing that product. And so by the time it gets to the grocery store, it may be a little more quote unquote watery than if you pulled it right out, which might change the taste. But I think it's a sensationalization. And I think there's just a lot of misinformation out there about what pasteurization does. And I want to still be able to say in 10 years from now to my kids that the United States is one of the safest food sources we have in the United States, because we can go to the grocery store, buy lettuce, meat, and milk and feel comfortable feeding it to our families. And I want my kids, I want my grandkids, I want my parents, my grandparents to all have that safety forever and ever and ever. And other countries aren't as fortunate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we always say public health is a victim of its own success, right? Like these other countries that don't have pasteurization as the standard. Think about all the milk-borne illnesses, that their populations are suffering. So just real quick, and then Sarah, we're turning it over to you for a history lesson on Louis. But Val, you mentioned something briefly about choice. And that actually did come up in my conversations with a lot of the farmers I was interacting with. Well, they kept saying, well, people have the right to choose to drink raw milk. I'm coming from public health, which notoriously butts heads with a lot of those more libertarian stances. And my thinking is it's this simple way to ensure the safety of the milk that we're consuming. It's like putting on a seatbelt. It just makes driving so right up. Catherine, you like that?
My mom has said that. I mean, she and I have had these conversations forever. And I mean, the easiest way that she ever explained it to me when I was, 9 years old or whatever was pasteurization is like a seatbelt. Why wouldn't you do it? It cannot harm anything. It can only help.
Yeah. But what's so interesting is, and there's been so much talk about raw milk. And Sarah, I know you're not on social media, but you really can't imagine. Catherine and Val, I'm sure you've seen. I mean, it's all over the place. Despite all these, CDC warnings about raw milk, it almost seems to be exacerbating the issue. And we've seen in some places raw milk sales are actually increasing. And I was telling Catherine and Val before we hit record, I live in Western Mass now, and it is, there are rural communities, there are farms nearby, and they're really doubling down on the sale of raw milk. So there's a very interesting thing. It's almost like a pushback to these health warnings. But all right, Let's get into what pasteurization is, how it came about. Sarah?
We got to take a step back here, and you all know I love a definition. It's really, if we're going to talk about pasteurization, I think we first need to talk about a guy named Louis Pasteur, for whom pasteurization was named. This guy was a French chemist known for his work on germs and health. He was not a physician, but he's known as actually one of the founders of microbiology and also the founder of zymology, which is the science of fermentation. And just very broadly, fermentation is the biological and chemical process that's needed to make alcoholic beverages, bread, yogurts, cheeses, and basically very, very high level, it's just the conversion of sugar molecules into ethanol and carbon dioxide. And this is done in the presence of bacteria or yeast. So this guy, Pasteur, first connected yeast to the process of fermentation in the context of wine in 1857. So he observed under a microscope that yeast on the skins of grapes caused grape juice to ferment into wine. And that actually, if you sterilized the skins of the grapes and thereby killed the yeast, that fermentation wouldn't take place. So this really important connection was made that the microbes that were growing in wine and beer, then he determined that these microbes were very similar to those that might be causing disease in humans and also animals. So from here, he hypothesized that microbes are everywhere and that they must be responsible for all kinds of processes, including those that make food spoil. So in 1865, he patented a process called pasteurization in which liquids such as milk were heated to very high temperatures, usually between 60 to 100 degrees Celsius. And this was done in order to kill the microbes. So this guy also, Louis also did really important work in biology, experimental work on biogenesis, immunology, and vaccinations. And fun fact, in 1879, he also developed the first lab-manufactured vaccine for chicken cholera and helped to solidify germ theory in modern science. So we're really big fans of Louis Pasteur over here at Unbiased Science. This guy really laid the groundwork and he kind of made pasteurization possible. He discovered it.
You're a real one, Louie.
Yeah, we love him.
I'm going to turn it over to you in a sec because I'm really curious about some of the practical considerations. Like, what does this mean? What are the costs involved? Like, what is the process for actual pasteurization? But my understanding is that there are several types of pasteurization now available, but that there are two main overarching types. There's the high temperature short time, which heats the milk to 161 degrees Fahrenheit for approximately 15 seconds. And then there's the ultra high temperature, which heats the milk to 280 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit for approximately 2 to 6 seconds. Both types then immediately cool the milk back down to below 40 degrees. And this comes from the American Dairy Association. They said that the primary difference between the two is shelf life. So the high temperature short time pasteurized milk is the gallon jug that we see at the grocery store. That's typically dated 1 to 2 weeks from the time of purchase. And then the ultra high temperature milk or aseptic milk, on the other hand, is often dated several months in the future. And then they said both are delicious and nutritious real milk that is safe from bacteria and harmful pathogens. So, Catherine, can you sort of talk about, like, what does this look like to a dairy farmer? Like, is this an expensive process? Like, what are some of the practical considerations?
Yeah, so I'll get into that in just a second, Jess, but I want to go back to Louis Pasteur for just a second.
Yeah.
I was, just a little anecdote, I was traveling with my CEO in Scotland in December. The company I work for is based in Scotland. And we were just traveling along. We were going to some farms and stuff. And the conversation turned over to who are the top 5 people you would ever want to have dinner with, right? From history. And he gave me his. It was Winston Churchill and someone else. And it was very, high level intelligentsia kind of stuff. And the first thing that popped out of my mouth was Louis Pasteur. And he looks over at me and he goes, Louis Pasteur, you just want to sit in a lab all night and talk with that guy? This guy is a seminal figure in the dairy industry. He changed life for us. Yes, I want to have dinner with him.
And more broadly in biology in general. Like, he was the first one to really solidify the that life comes from other life concepts.
Yeah. Was he really?
Yeah. Biogenesis, because spontaneous generation was like the idea that life could just arise from nothing. So he did some really seminal experiments to sort of prove that no, actually, life doesn't come from nothing. It actually comes from other life.
Right. How cool. I love that, Catherine. That is such a fun anecdote.
Yeah. Well, Stuart, if you're listening, I stand by what I said a month ago, and I will for the rest of my life.
I don't blame you, honestly. Yeah. He was a real one.
He was. He really was. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Jess, to get back to your question. So there is high temp short time, and then there is ultra high temperature pasteurization. There is another one. It was one of the original methods. It's low temp long time. And I think that they heat the milk to 140 degrees and it's like 40 minutes. So it is a longer process. But what's mainly used is high temp short time and then UHC or ultra high temp UHT. So high temp short time is used, as you said, in fluid milk. Most of the dairy products that we see in the grocery store, in the dairy case at the back of the store. Ultra high temp, again, as you said, renders milk nearly aseptic and makes it very shelf stable. And that is used especially, one of the biggest contracts for that milk is actually the U.S. military, because they can safely ship that overseas and take care of our troops and give them a really solid nutritional base, right? It does taste just a little bit different because, it's hit that really high temperature. The nutritional profile is exactly the same. Same for any method of pasteurization as long as it's done properly. And that's, I think that's a really key thing to know in pasteurization, is because you get the kooks and the crazies out there. And I mean, they might take offense if they're listening to this, but I think that they are, because they'll say, that pasteurization wrecks the nutritional profile of milk. It does not. They'll say crazy things like pasteurization cures autism. It cures type 2 diabetes. It cures mental illness. It cures rheumatoid arthritis. And I'm here to tell you, and my parents have said this publicly, so I can say it again. My dad has type 2 diabetes. My mom had cancer a few years ago. She has rheumatoid arthritis, and they grew up on raw milk too. Okay. So it is not curing any of this kind of stuff.
These are some lofty claims.
Well, they also claim that it cures lactose intolerance, which, I mean, what? the mental gymnastics there.
I had lactose intolerance when I was very small for a few years. It just kind of developed, and I got a bellyache every day. I stopped drinking the milk from our tank for several years because it gave me a bellyache, and I was fortunate to grow out of it. But for the people who it is a lifelong situation, no, it does not cure it.
Interesting, incidentally, that some people can grow out of lactose intolerance and some people can grow into lactose intolerance. Because when I was a young child, I drank a lot of milk every morning, milk and cereal. And now in my 30s, I'm like, I can't drink milk anymore. Like it doesn't sit well anymore. So I don't know. Yeah, lactose intolerance is weird.
Yeah, but raw milk certainly is not going to help you out.
No, I don't. What?
Yeah, what is right? So just this is really coming from a place of curiosity. I would imagine there are costs associated with pasteurization, but to your point, Catherine, I mean, you want to keep your customers safe. A dead customer is not a good customer, right?
Oh, God.
I just want to acknowledge that there are costs associated with this, right? But that they're clearly justified in the name of safety. Right?
Absolutely. Okay. So there's a cost with processing of any food, right? I mean, you send a beef to the harvest plant and, breaking down that carcass and turning it into cuts of meat that we recognize at the grocery store. There's a cost associated with that. There's a cost associated with pasteurizing milk, with homogenizing it, which is making sure that the fat is evenly distributed so it doesn't rise to the top, which, cream line milk is sort of a thing in the industry because it gives you an indication of how much fat is in there, but it looks weird in the grocery store. And, the general public's like, what's going on there? So anyway, pasteurization, homogenization, turning it into a higher value product, an added value product, cheese, yogurt, any of those things that we talk about, ice cream, because hello, let's have ice cream. Of course, there are costs associated with getting food from where it was made to its next career, right? So there are costs associated. The public health risk absolutely minimizes what the costs are, and quite frankly, it's honestly just a cost of doing business. So it's we work that into cost of production and budgeting and all that sort of stuff. So,
and most of the pasteurization is done at the milk plants, correct, Catherine? Like once it goes off farm, it's done at the plants, correct?
Yep. So for commercial dairy farms, which is where most of our milk comes from in the United States, it is done. The milk leaves the dairy, and we go through incredible sanitation protocols between each milking, between each cow, as it goes into the bulk tank. And then when there's a receiver truck, the receiver truck has to be tagged clean. Like it is law across the United States that this truck has to be tagged clean. Milk is transferred into the bulk tank, and then that truck goes straight to the processing plant. And that tank that receives the milk also has to be tagged clean. So milk is tested something like 16 or 18 times before it ever even gets into a cheese vat or anything like that. So
wow.
And the raw milk, like in Idaho, 2-3 years ago, they passed legislation around allowing raw milk sales within the state lines. We can't transport raw milk outside of state lines. But we've had those same testing standards do not apply to raw milk, is my understanding either. And we had I think it was last year, there was at least 16 people that became extremely ill from raw milk in the state of Idaho because it came. And as a scientist, you can pronounce them all, but E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter, those things are something I never want to ever experience. I've had a few friends experience Campylobacter, and I do not want to, I never have to experience that.
There are some pretty serious symptoms associated to exposure to these bacteria. I mean, diarrhea, stomach cramping, vomiting, fever,
Yeah. And, I often hear people say, oh, let's see, I have a little bit of diarrhea. No, it can actually be extremely severe. And especially forget if you're immunocompromised. I mean, these things can actually be lethal. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. But Val, I'm glad that you mentioned some of the policies. There are federal policies around dairy production, right? And then, and I don't understand, all of it, but I understand that there are differences at a state level. And some of the folks I was speaking with last week, they were telling me, oh, there are also certain known workarounds. So like you could say that, oh, I'm selling raw milk for pets. Catherine has something to say. And by the way, we've seen like there was reports of these cats dying from the avian flu because they were drinking raw milk. Oh yeah. There's a whole thing. It's terrible. But Catherine, I saw you nodding. You've seen this as well.
Yeah, I want to come back to Val's point about avian influenza in a little bit, because that one is stellar and really, really obviously very relevant at the moment. But the whole pet food workaround thing, I learned about this in the last year or two, and it is so, I find it a reprehensible way to just try and hawk a product, right? Like that's what I feel like most raw milk sellers are doing, is that they will do anything and say anything to try and get you to buy their product, including lying, which is what's happening. And it happens across it happens everywhere, right? But as the daughter of dairymen, as someone who has lived her life in the industry, that really, really, really gets my goat, my dairy goat. And it's just because it's such a contradiction to what most dairymen in the industry are striving to do, which is to provide a safe and wholesome product, and working a workaround. And I've seen Facebook pages about this where, we've got your pet food raw milk ready for you, and, saying we have to label it this way so that you're able to buy it. I mean, they're out there in public saying why they're doing this just to be able to get around regulations. And Val's exactly right. There's patchwork regulations because raw milk is not federally regulated. It's not legal to sell it across the United States. It is a patchwork state by state, and it's a hot mess. Let's just put it that way.
It's a hot mess. Also, side note, aren't cats not supposed to drink milk? Isn't that a thing? But all right, I feel like someone's going to say that listening to this episode.
My cat oat milk.
Okay.
Well, she loves it.
But that's not real. Be upset about that. Someone will be upset about that. We expect an email.
I think you're going to head towards the avian influenza, but to plug one of our previous episodes about avian influenza with Dr. Barb, we talked about that cats were the canary in the coal mine for avian influenza. And so it doesn't surprise me that you are hearing that cats are dying from drinking raw milk because of the avian influenza. Like, that's just... They are one of the most animals that don't handle it well at all. Whereas a cow at least handles it. It just causes reproductive issues and lactating issues. And so
that's so sad.
And Catherine, I saw you were saying there are actually 2 episodes that you did, and I'd love to link to them in the show notes if you'll send that over. Just real quick before we get to the avian flu, let's very big thing, and Val, you brought this up earlier, these claims about nutritional differences. And I want to tell you, I did a thorough literature review. I summarized, we'll link to some of these actual studies, but here's what I found. Okay, in terms of vitamins, pasteurization slightly reduces the levels of certain vitamins such as B1, B2, C, and folate, but these vitamins are present in very low amounts in milk to begin with, making the impact minimal, which means there's not going to be any clinically relevant difference in the vitamin composition in raw milk or pasteurized milk. Vitamin B2 is an exception, as milk is a significant dietary source, and this reduction might be more pronounced, but again, it's not a major source of B2. This should not be a reason to consume raw milk. In terms of macronutrients, the macronutrient content, including fat, lactose, and total protein, remains largely unaffected by pasteurization. I did want to note that lysine, which is an amino acid, is slightly reduced by heat processing. Again, no significant clinical impact. And then finally, minerals. Pasteurized milk has higher levels of calcium and magnesium compared to raw milk, making it potentially more nutritious in terms of these minerals. All right?
I have a question for the scientists. So one claim I hear all the time is that pasteurization takes out the things that help your gut operate better. Microbes. And so they
microbes.
They use it as, like a kombucha or that kind of health thing. But can you help unpack that a little bit too from a scientific perspective?
Sarah, we just did an episode on the microbiome, by the way. Yeah, I would.
Right. I was going to say One thing I will say is that, like, we did mention all of these, that milk is a has all of these vitamins and minerals and macronutrients. But I think it's important to emphasize here that what's important in terms of one's overall health is to maintain a balanced diet in general. So, I mean, people aren't just drinking milk and consuming dairy products. It's very important that, that one consumes food products that are significant sources of all of these vitamins and minerals other than milk.
Right.
So,
and I would just add, so I think you're talking about probiotics here, and I'd be lying if that was not the focus of the lit search I did, so I could do a little digging and add whatever I find to the show notes. But we were, as we discussed on the last, or I guess 2 episodes ago, it's
2 episodes ago.
It's not quite binary, right? It's not good and bad, but there are harmful bacteria. There are some that are less harmful, not harmful. But pasteurization, yes, I mean, it's going to kill those things. But again, you're thinking of the benefit and the risk, right? Like the benefit is going to so far outweigh, the risk is going to so far outweigh the benefits, right? When it comes to consuming raw milk. Sarah, did you have anything else to say?
No, I was just going to say, like, all of the, like, E. coli, C. jejuni, Salmonella, Listeria, monocytogenes, all of these things are harmful and are present in raw milk. And what makes up a healthy gut microbiome, and I encourage folks to go and listen to our microbiome episode. We have an amazing expert on the microbiome who came and spoke to us, Kristen, and we go into this a little deeper. But what's so important about maintaining a healthy gut microbiome is a diverse and healthy diet. Right. Yeah. So that's what's so important. It's not just consuming like one food, one type of food,
or one macronutrient.
Yes, exactly. All right, we're going to get into avian flu. I just wanted to note that even before avian flu was something that we were talking about, raw milk was, I believe, the #1 cause of foodborne illness in the United States, if I'm not mistaken. I'll double check that. So
I heard that too.
Between 1998 and 2018, there were 200. This is all specific to raw milk. So there were 202 disease outbreaks due to raw milk, almost 3,000 illnesses, hundreds of hospitalizations. There were a handful of deaths. And this is based on only a small percentage of Americans consuming raw milk. So I think that really drives home the potential dangers of raw milk. There were also some specific outbreaks I wanted to showcase. In 2005, there was an E. coli outbreak with all 5 hospitalized patients being children between the ages of 1 and 13. 2006, 6 children developed severe kidney complications due to raw milk-borne illness. And in 2008, the 3 most seriously ill patients in a 14-person outbreak were children. There are real dangers here. And again, this was before the avian flu became a thing. So do you, I don't know, Val or Catherine, did you want to talk about just avian flu and raw milk at all and what you're seeing?
Yeah, Val and I can bounce off of each other on this, but we first became aware of it March of 2024. So we're almost a year into this whole shebang. It shocked the absolute heck out of the industry because it's avian flu. What in heck is it doing in dairy cows? Right. And it was discovered in Texas in June, I believe. Val and I, we wanted to let the industry get a little bit to grips with it, and then do an episode on it on Millennial Ag, and we'll link that in the show notes here. But we had the Idaho State vet come on and talk to us, and it was a fantastic overview of what had been happening for the first 3 months of the outbreak. And then obviously we've been keeping an eye on it over the summer. My company has actually been doing some very interesting work on watching how body condition, which is, the amount of condition that a cow is carrying on her body, how that can affect how she reacts to avian flu. So, it was very much top of our minds over the summer as that work was taking place on a dairy in Colorado and in California that my company was working on. And then, we went through the fall and Val piped up and said, hey, we ought to do a follow-up on this. And it just happened to work out that we had been in contact through my company with the vet who actually identified avian influenza in Texas. And she was on our podcast last week. That aired last week. And she was such an outstanding resource. She was an incredible, incredible guest. She gave us an update of where things are at. And some of the questions that Valine and I had from an industry perspective was obviously the first thing that is affected is a cow's milk production. So how much milk she's making every day, and her general well-being. And the one thing that we didn't know in June of last year is what's happening to her reproductive capacity. So what happens when she gets pregnant? What happens to that baby? What happens in her next lactation? And Dr. Peterson walked us through that in a really, really excellent way. But it's also very, very disturbing because of what Val said. The cats being the canary in the coal mine. And I'll just say what some of those reproductive impacts are and then turn it over to Val to continue on what it looks like as this outbreak continues. But so what's happening is that cows are having a harder time getting pregnant. It's taking more cycles to get those cows pregnant. And obviously a cow has to have a calf to come into milk production, right? So she needs to have a calf every year to be able to continue producing milk and not have a career change. But what's happening is it's harder for them to get pregnant. And unfortunately, where the outbreak has been worst is in California. And there have been a significant number of abortions of these cows who have been affected. And that is devastating from a personal standpoint, because as dairymen, as any agricultural producer, our first and foremost concern is the well-being of those animals. And you don't want to see this happen. And so that's the really scary thing that's happening right now. So that's as far as production and reproduction goes. And then, Val can take it from here.
Tying it back to pasteurization, they've been doing an extensive amount of testing, and they found out that it actually shows up in the milk prior to the cow showing symptoms. And so one thing through all that testing is they confirmed that pasteurization does take care of the avian influenza in the milk, because it can be transmitted from cow to human. And that was picked up. One of the first things that the Texas cases provided was that it can be transmissible to humans. And with our coming off the backs of COVID, there was concerns with that. And so it just reassures us that pasteurization is the key to this. But there's a lot of concern for the industry. Prices of cattle are through the roof right now. And when you reduce the amount of animals able to give birth, or even their chances to give birth, we're just going to see an increase of price. And you're seeing an increase of egg prices in the grocery store. And if I had a crystal ball, I wouldn't be surprised if we continue on the trajectory we're on, that milk and cheese prices may follow suit, or we may be, shifting between different processors in the grocery store a lot more than we currently do. And that's totally a speculation at this point. I don't want to be quoted as this is what's going to happen, but it's what you can kind of track with the egg and poultry industry right now too. So you got to keeping abundance and safe product in the grocery store is something we've been very fortunate for the last 50 years or whatever. And I as an industry that provides food, it definitely scares me that we would do anything less but the very best to keep all that in check.
And, Val, you mentioned this, but the FDA and other agencies have been doing a ton of testing of milk, really carefully tracking what's going on here. And they have detected very high levels of the virus in raw milk. And studies have been done and show that pasteurization does effectively kill the virus. So I think, again, it just is quite clear now more than ever that pasteurization is of the utmost importance.
Talking to Barb Peterson again about how the flu is transmitted, is that the highest viral load by a long shot is in milk. It's in milk. It's not really in feces, not really in spit or mucus. What do you call cow spit? I don't even know.
Spit, probably.
Yeah, right. Know a lot of things about cows. Cows, not what we call cow spit. Anyway, so it's passed through milk. And like we were talking about before, if you've got kitties on your farm and there's milk around, they're going to find it. Whether or not they should be drinking it, those kitties are going to find it. Mm-hmm. And you can do whatever you want. Kitties will find milk because they love it. Mm-hmm. And especially raw milk because it has such a higher fat content, and we could get into that some other time. But so it's been passed into cats, which is even scarier because it hopping that quickly between species is really scary. The beginning of the human cases of avian influenza in dairy cows was because what we think happened was that some milk got into milkers' eyes. And, because conjunctivitis was basically the only symptom that we were seeing in humans. But that was almost a year ago. And we've seen reports just in the last week or so that the first death has occurred in a human from avian influenza in dairy cows. And, there's a couple more illnesses that have been reported where those people have not had any contact, as far as the contact tracers can understand, with a dairy, with a cow, with raw milk, with anything. And so the rapidity with which this virus is mutating is really, really scary. So what fixes this for the moment is pasteurizing milk.
There you have it, folks.
There you have it. And yet we see an increased interest in raw milk these days. I don't.
Before, I know we're closing out here, and before I ask Catherine and Val if they have any final thoughts that they want to share with the audience and where we can listen to your podcast, I just wanted to share this. This is posted on the FDA website. I checked this morning. We're recording on January 22nd. Nearly all, so 99% of the commercial milk supply that is produced on dairy farms in the U.S. comes from farms that participate in the Grade A milk safety program and follow the pasteurized milk ordinance, which includes controls that help ensure the safety of dairy products. Pasteurization and diversion or destruction of abnormal milk are two important measures that are part of the federal state milk safety program. And then lastly, on January 17th, there was an update. The FDA announced that it has determined that it is necessary for manufacturers of cat and dog foods who are covered by the FDA Food Safety Modernization Act and using uncooked or unpasteurized materials derived from poultry or cattle, so that includes unpasteurized milk, to reanalyze their food safety plans to include H5N1. And furthermore, the FDA is issuing the announcement to ensure that cat and dog food manufacturers are aware of information about the new H5N1 hazard associated with their products. This is a long way of saying that this virus is, again, detected in milk and it impacts humans. It's going to impact our pets, our beloved dogs and cats. We're all on high alert. This is not the time to go out and buy raw milk for any reason. Any final thoughts, Catherine and Val?
I appreciate all the work you guys are doing. And avian influenza is the one thing on top of mind and a prime example of why we have pasteurization in place. But there could be tens of diseases we don't even know about going through that this is actually taking effect. Right. And so reminding people to do their research. And I think now than ever, reminding all listeners to ask the questions before jumping on a new fad or, jumping through whatever. I think it's going to get, unfortunately, more crazy before it gets better with the current situation we have in our country. And I just see here, we live in a great country with freedom of speech, freedom of rights and so forth, but we also need to protect one another and care for one another too, and have a real conversation and not a polarized one. So we thank you guys for having us on, and then I'll let Catherine wrap up and she can plug Millennial Ag for us too.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. We came across your podcast. We have a vet friend here in Colorado who posts a lot of your stuff, and I like everything that she reposts. Dr. Julia Herman, if she's listening here, she posts a ton of your stuff, and she's really awesome. She's also very interested in public health as well. She posted your content, a month or two ago when we first got in touch about raw milk, and I was so delighted to see, genuine, serious people with serious educations take this so incredibly seriously, because it is a scary, scary thing, for my family's livelihood, for our industry's reputation, for public health. And what we as agriculturists want more than anything is that people, for everyone, regardless of race, creed, color, background, to have access to safe and abundant food. And by and large, that's what American agriculture does. And that's what pasteurization does. So thank you very much for allowing us to be here. One anecdote I want to share before I share our Millennial Ag stuff is that pasteurization, as you said earlier in the episode, there was a lot of resistance to making it a public health policy and regulation. And what finally pushed it over the edge was a mobster from the actual mafia in Chicago. I don't know if it was a granddaughter or a niece, died from raw milk, from swill milk. And that pushed him over the edge. And he was the catalyst that finally got pasteurization legislation passed. So that's just a story that I absolutely love.
Story. Oh my gosh.
Hell yeah, Chicago represent.
Sarah. All right,
Get
Kevin,
stuff done.
tell us where we can listen to Millennial Ag.
So Millennial Ag, you can check out our website, www.millennialag.com. We are most active on Facebook, Instagram, and we were on TikTok. Not entirely sure what that situation is at the moment. You can listen to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, all the usual places that you find podcasts. So thank you very much for allowing us that plug.
This was such a great conversation. Really, we can't thank you enough for sharing your perspectives. And yes, can't wait to tune into the podcast and encourage everyone to do so. Sarah, take us home.
All right. Thank you guys for tuning in. We hope you learned a thing or two. I certainly did. It was great to hear these amazing perspectives. And please join us next week on your trusted source for no nonsense, just science.